The Royal Canadian Regiment is an infantry regiment of the Canadian Army. The regiment consists of 4 battalions, 3 in the regular force and 1 in the Primary Reserve. The RCR is the senior infantry regiment in the regular force, but its 4th Battalion is ranked 11th in the order of precedence among infantry regiments in the Primary Reserve. The RCR was originally authorized as the Infantry School Corps on the 21st of December 1883, and established its first 3 company stations at Fredericton, New Brunswick, St. Jean, Quebec, and Toronto, Ontario. In 1887 a 4th company was authorized and the next year was established at London, Ontario, now consisting of 3 regular force battalions and 1 reserve force battalion. The regiment's 4 battalions are now stationed in Ontario and New Brunswick, with many of its soldiers drawn from Ontario and the Atlantic provinces in recent decades. The regiment maintains a general connection as the local infantry regiment for Eastern Canada. The RCR maintains a regimental headquarters in Petawawa, Ontario, which has no operational command role but handles regimental affairs outside the responsibility of the individual battalions. The Royal Canadian Regiment Museum is located within historic Wolseley Hall in London, Ontario. Wolseley Barracks in London has been continuously occupied by some element of the regiment since construction of Wolseley Hall was completed in 1888. At various times Wolseley Barracks has been the home of the regimental headquarters, the 1st and 2nd Battalions, and remains the home of the 4th Battalion today. Battalions. Lineage. The Royal Canadian Regiment originated the 21st of December 1883 as the Infantry School Corps, redesignated the 14th of May 1892 as the Canadian Regiment of Infantry, redesignated the 24th of May 1893 as the Royal Regiment of Canadian Infantry, redesignated the 1st of April 1899 as the Royal Canadian Regiment of Infantry, redesignated the 1st of November 1901 as the Royal Canadian Regiment, amalgamated the 25th of April 1958 with the London and Oxford Fusiliers, retaining its designation. The 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, redesignated in 1970 as the 4th Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment. 4th Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, designated as the 4th Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment on the 22nd of May 1990. The London and Oxford Fusiliers originated the 27th of April 1866 in London, Ontario as the 7th Battalion Infantry, Prince Arthur's Own, redesignated the 1st of May 1866 as the 7th Battalion Infantry, redesignated the 15th of February 1867 as the 7th Battalion, London Light Infantry, redesignated the 16th of January 1880 as the 7th Battalion, Fusiliers, redesignated the 8th of May 1900 as the 7th Regiment, Fusiliers, redesignated the 29th of March 1920 the Western Ontario Regiment, redesignated the 1st of August 1924 as the Canadian Fusiliers, amalgamated the 15th of December 1936 with the headquarters and a company of the 2nd Machine Gun Battalion, CMGC, in redesignated as the Canadian Fusiliers, redesignated the 29th of January 1942 as the 2nd Battalion, the Canadian Fusiliers, redesignated the 24th of March 1942 as the 2nd Battalion, the Canadian Fusiliers, redesignated 1 April 1946 as the Canadian Fusiliers, amalgamated 1 October 1954 with the Oxford Rifles and redesignated as the London and Oxford Fusiliers, amalgamated 25 April 1958 with the Royal Canadian Regiment and redesignated as the 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment. The Oxford Rifles originated 14 August 1863 in Woodstock, Ontario as the 22nd Battalion Volunteer Militia Rifles, Canada of the Oxford Rifles. Redesignated 13 April 1866 as the 22nd Battalion the Oxford Rifles, redesignated 8 May 1900 as the 22nd Regiment the Oxford Rifles. Redesignated 29 March 1920 as the Oxford Rifles, redesignated 18 March 1942 as the 2nd Battalion, the Oxford Rifles, redesignated 1 June 1945 as the Oxford Rifles, amalgamated 1 October 1954 with the Canadian Fusiliers and redesignated as the London and Oxford Fusiliers. The 2nd Machine Gun Battalion, CMGC, originated 1 June 1919 in London, Ontario as the 2nd Machine Gun Brigade, CMGC, redesignated 15 September 1924 as the 2nd Machine Gun Battalion, CMGC. Amalgamated 15 December 1936 with the Canadian Fusiliers. Lineage chart. Lineage of the Royal Canadian Regiment. Perpetuations. War of 1812. The Loyal London Volunteers. 1st Regiment of Middlesex Militia. 1st Regiment of Oxford Militia. The Great War. 1st Battalion, CEF. 33rd Battalion, CEF, 71st Battalion, CEF, 142nd Battalion, CEF, 168th Battalion, CEF, 2nd Battalion, P. Canadian Machine Gun Corps, CEF. Operational history. Afghanistan. The regiment contributed personnel to the various task forces and the regular force battalion served as the basis for several of the task forces that operated in Afghanistan between 2002 and 2014. Battle Honours. The Royal Canadian Regiment has been awarded a total of 58 battle honours. In the list below, battle honours in capitals were awarded for participation in large operations and campaigns, while those in lowercase indicate honours granted for more specific battles. Battle honours in bold type are emblazoned on the regimental colours. The War of 1812. Defensive Canada 1812–1815. Defense du Canada, Detroit, Niagara. Non-emblazonable honorary distinction. Defense of Canada 1812–1815. Defense du Canada, Northwest Rebellion, Saskatchewan, Northwest Canada 1885. South African War. Paardeberg, South Africa 1899–1900. Great War. Second World War. The Korean War. Korea 1951–1953. Afghanistan. Afghanistan. History. Early history. The Royal Canadian Regiment is one of Canada's oldest regular force military units. In 2012 the regiment was assigned the perpetuation of the 1st Regiment of Middlesex Militia and the 1st Regiment of Oxford Militia from the War of 1812, and as a result carries 3 battle honours from that conflict. The RCR was also assigned the perpetuation of the Loyal London Volunteers, which was accompanied by a non-emblazonable honorary distinction. The regiment itself was formed as the Infantry School Corps on the 21st of December 1883, authorized by a Militia Act which also created the Cavalry School Corps. These school corps were created as regular units that would train the Canadian militia. The first companies stood up in Fredericton, NB, Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, QC, and Toronto on in 1883, with a fourth company standing up in London on several years later. The Infantry School Corps' first battle honours were earned during the Northwest Rebellion in 1885, where it fought at Batoche and Cut Knife Creek. The regiment later provided personnel to the Yukon Field Force, which assisted the Northwest Mounted Police in the Yukon during the Gold Rush. The regiment was then in the South African War. Its overseas deployment was delayed by a garrison assignment in Bermuda from September 1914 until August 1915. Upon returning to Nova Scotia, its members attested for overseas service with the Canadian Expeditionary Force, arriving in France in October 1915 to fight in WW1. The South African War. The regiment's name was changed to the Royal Canadian Regiment of Infantry in 1893, with a new emphasis on being combat-capable. William Dillon Otter, formerly of the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, was the first commanding officer. He would later become the first Canadian-born Chief of the General Staff, the head of the Canadian Army. During the South African War, the 2nd Battalion was raised from across the country to contribute Canada's first contingent in this war, with Otter in command. This battalion was quickly disbanded in 1900 upon its return to Canada, even though they were considered by many British officers to be the best infantry battalion in the country. The 3rd Battalion was also raised at this time, in 1900, and was employed as a garrison force in Halifax until 1902, when it was also disbanded. In the Boer War, the Toronto Company of the 2 RCR fought Canada's first overseas battle at Sunnyside, Cape Colony, on January 1, 1900, defeating a Boer commando in an action led by Australia's Queensland Mounted Infantry. The unit as a whole then joined and played an instrumental role in the victory at the Battle of Paardeberg Drift, including an advance by night towards the enemy lines, quietly digging trenches on high ground 65 yards from the Boer lines. On February 27, 1900, the Boers, staring into the muzzles of Canadian and British rifles, surrendered, thus removing the commando blocking the way to the first Boer capital, Bloemfontein, Orange Free State. This date has since been celebrated by the regiment as Paardeberg Day, having delivered the first unqualified good news of the war for the British Empire. The regiment also distinguished itself on the march north, arriving first at the gates of Pretoria. During the South African War, Private Richard Rowland Thompson was awarded a Queen's Scarf, one of the 4 presented to soldiers of the Dominions. A further 4 scarves crocheted by Queen Victoria went to non-commissioned officers of the British Army. A small statuette by André Gauthier commemorates the centennial of the Royal Canadian Regiment's Battle of Paardeberg during the Boer War. In October 1901, the regiment received new colours from the Duke of Cornwall and York during his visit to Canada, and the regiment's name was changed to the Royal Canadian Regiment. In 1914, the regiment was deployed to Bermuda for garrison duties from September 1914 to August 1915, when it returned to Halifax and reattested for overseas service. The RCR arrived in France in October 1915 to join the new 3rd Canadian Division. The regiment combined with Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry and the 42nd and 49th Canadian Infantry Battalions to form the 7th Canadian Infantry Brigade. Battle honours awarded to the Royal Canadian Regiment for its actions in the First World War included Mount Sorrel, Somme, 1916, Flers Courcelet, Ancre Heights, Arras, 1917, 18 Vimy, 1917, Hill 70, Ypres, 1917, Passchendaele, Amiens, Scarpa, 1918, Hindenburg Line, Canal du Nord, Pursuit to Mons, France and Flanders, 1914–18. Among the honours and awards to members of the regiment in the First World War was the Victoria Cross won by Lieutenant Milton Gregg. The RCR also recognises the VC won by Lieutenant Frederick William Campbell, who was an officer of the 1st Battalion of the Canadian Expeditionary Force, one of the battalions now perpetuated by the RCR. The RCR remained a permanent force regiment between the wars and returned to its role of providing instruction to the militia through garrisons in London, Halifax, Toronto and Montreal. On the 1st of September 1939 the regiment was mobilized as part of the Canadian Active Service Force as Canada prepared for participation in the Second World War. When war was declared on September 10, the RCR had already been allocated to the 1st Canadian Infantry Brigade, a formation made up entirely of Ontario units, moving to the United Kingdom in December 1939 as a component of the 1st Canadian Infantry Division. The RCR saw hard training for almost 4 years. On the 10th of July 1943, the RCR landed at Pacino in the opening waves of the Allied invasion of Sicily. The last member of the regiment to participate in these original waves, George F. Burroughs of Chatham, Ontario, died on April 11, 2012, in Windsor, Ontario at the age of 88. The regiment and its sister units in the 1st Brigade, the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment and the 48th Highlanders of Canada fought in several battles as the division advanced north and then east, towards Messina. After the 38-day campaign on the island was completed, the regiment was involved in another amphibious landing at Reggio di Calabria, as part of Allied invasion of the Italian mainland in September. The RCR fought in several battles of the Italian campaign, including key engagements in the Moro River Valley near Ortona in December 1943. During 1944, the regiment took part in the Battle of Monte Cassino in attacks on German defensive lines called the Hitler Line and later the Gothic Line. The regiment was transferred to Northwest Europe in February 1945 during Operation Goldflake and took part in the liberation of the Dutch city of Apeldoorn. The regiment received 28 battle honours for its participation in the Second World War. The regiment returned home to Canada in 1945. In 1950 the regiment was called upon to contribute to Canada's forces for the Korean War. A new active service force was to be raised, and the regiment expanded to a 2-battalion, then a 3-battalion, organization. The 2nd Battalion, followed by the 1st and 3rd Battalions, each saw service in Korea. The 2nd Battalion helped stabilize the 38th parallel, most notably at the Chailly sector. In October 1952, the 1st Battalion fought the Chinese at the Battle of Koang-san. It was replaced by the 3rd Battalion, which took over the Jamestown line on Hill 187, where it fought one of the last engagements before the armistice in 1953. After the end of the Korean War, the regiment was reduced to 2 battalions, when the 3rd Battalion was disbanded in July 1954. In 1954 2 London, Ontario, militia regiments, the Canadian Fusiliers and the Oxford Rifles were amalgamated and redesignated the London and Oxford Fusiliers. This unit thus became the reserve component of the RCR. In 1958, it was renamed 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment. In 1989, the designation of the Reserve Battalion was shortened to 4th Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment. This amalgamation also brought to the regiment the perpetuation of a number of battalions of the First World War Canadian Expeditionary Force, including the 1st, 33rd, 71st, 142nd and 168th Battalions, as well as the 2nd Battalion of the Canadian Machine Gun Corps. The amalgamation also saw the total battle honours for the First World War, based on the combined list of amalgamated components of the regiment, increased to the full list seen below. The Militia Battalion was renumbered as the 4th Battalion in 1970 when the Canadian Guards were reduced to nil strength, and the soldiers of that regiment's 2nd Battalion became the restored 3rd Battalion, the RCR, on the regular force order of battle. At the same time, the 2nd Battalion of the RCR was relocated to CFB Gagetown, New Brunswick, and reconstituted from the soldiers of the Black Watch of Canada as its 2 battalions that were also reduced to nil strength and removed from the active regiments in the Army's regular force order of battle. During the 1950s and 1960s, battalions of the RCR were stationed as part of 4 Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group at Fort York, Germany. These deployments were executed by 1 RCR and 2 RCR. 3rd Battalion was later deployed to Germany, stationed in Baden-Solingen 1977–84 and 1988–93. All 3 regular force battalions of the RCR were deployed during the October crisis in 1970 as part of the government's response to the FLQ. Major John Hasek became the first commander of the Skyhawks parachute team when it formed in 1971. The 3 regular force battalions were also deployed in to support the 1976 Summer Olympics in Montreal, Quebec. Throughout the Cold War period, the RCR participated in Canada's contributions to United Nations peacekeeping. For battalions of the regiment, this meant rotating tours on the island of Cyprus. The 6-month tours of this mission, named Operation Snow Goose, were executed by elements of the regiment 13 times between 1966 and 1992. In 1977, the 3rd Battalion was posted to CFB Baden-Solingen in Germany. In 1983, a Century of Service plaque at the Royal Military College St. John commemorates the centennial of the Royal Canadian Regiment. 1883–1983, Canada's oldest permanent force infantry regiment. Elements of the regiment garrisoned at St. John-sur-Richelieu from 1884 to 1908 and 1924. In 1984, the battalion was rotated to Winnipeg. In 1988, the battalion was rotated back to Baden until the base was closed in 1993, at which time it was disbanded in Germany and subsequently stood up at CFB Borden, Ontario, as a 1090th Battalion. The 1090th concept created an infantry battalion in each regular force regiment, with approximately 10% of its personnel being full-time regular soldiers, while the remaining positions were filled by reserve force soldiers from affiliated units in the region. These units existed until 1996, when the 3 1090th battalions were stood down and replaced by light infantry battalions on the regular force order of battle, initially formed without specific regimental affiliation. Within the year, the light infantry battalion was relocated to CFB Petawawa and officially designated the 3rd Battalion, the RCR. In 1990, HQ and Duke of Edinburgh's company of the 1st Battalion deployed to Cornwall, Ontario, as part of Operation Carnawake. The 2nd Battalion, as part of 5 Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group, deployed to the Montreal region to partake in Operation Salon. These deployments were part of the government's response to the Oka crisis. In 1991, M Company and a platoon from P Company from 3rd Battalion and C Company from 1 RCR served in the Persian Gulf during Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm, the First Gulf War. These companies were employed on airfield and field hospital security duties. In 1992, soldiers from the English-speaking N Company of the 3rd Battalion, based out of Canadian Forces Base Baden-Soellingen in Germany, as an attachment to the French-speaking Royal 22E Regiment, operationally secured the Sarajevo airport during the Yugoslav wars. This operation saw a redeployment of the entire battle group from Croatia to the Sarajevo theatre of operations. Under the command of General Louis Mackenzie, Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada, made mention of this operational force and its commitment to international peace while she was in the National Capital Region that same year during Canada's 125th, stating, "I am delighted to be here with you once again, to share in this day of national celebration, and as a member of the Canadian family, to wish Canada a happy birthday on this 125th anniversary of Confederation. We have an occasion, and a country, worth celebrating. I want to say a special word about the brave Canadian soldiers who today seek to bring peace, under the United Nations auspices, to a dangerous situation in Bosnia. They serve both Canada and the cause of peace with courage and conviction. As Queen of Canada, I salute their contribution with pride. You have inherited a country uniquely worth preserving. I call on you all, wherever you live, whatever your walk of life, to cherish that inheritance, and to protect it with all your strength. May God bless each and every one of you as you go about that task. And may God bless Canada." Shortly thereafter, the Governor-General of Canada bestowed the Commander-in-Chief Unit Commendation to N Company. The official warrant stated, "The first was to the 1st Battalion of the Royal 22E Regiment Battle Group for having opened the airport in the besieged city of Sarajevo in July 1992. The commendation was officially presented to the unit by Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Adrienne Clarkson, CC, CMM, Com, CD, Governor-General of Canada and Commander-in-Chief of the Canadian Forces, during a ceremony which took place at the Citadel in Quebec City on 9 September 2002. The unit returned to Bosnia for a tour with the Stabilization Force (SFOR) in 1998 and 1999. All three battalions served as peacekeepers in the Sinai Peninsula, in Bosnia and Kosovo. In 2000, the 2nd Battalion had the honour of mounting the Queen's Guard at Buckingham Palace, when a detachment came to London to commemorate the Canadian involvement in the Second Boer War, and to celebrate the reopening of Canada House. Later that year, H Company Group of 2nd Battalion deployed to Eastern Africa as part of UNMEE, as the United States prepared militarily and politically to launch military actions against Iraq. 2 RCR formed a provisional battle group and was warned off that if the government decided to participate, it would deploy. The government decided against participation and instead decided to return to Afghanistan. I Company Group deployed to Kabul on the 26th of May 2003 to form the Defence and Security Company for the construction of the Canadian camp. It returned to Canada in August of that year after 3rd Battalion Group took on ISAF operations. The Leadership Award by André Gauthier was commissioned for the Royal Canadian Regiment. In March 2004, the same company deployed to Port-au-Prince, Haiti, as part of Operation Halo to conduct security operations as part of the multinational interim force. This force was set in place in order to set the conditions for the United Nations to take over. I Company conducted a relief in place with H Company Group in June. H Company changed roles to the UN force and redeployed to Gonaives, Haiti. It returned to Canada in September of that year. Afghanistan, 2006. Present in August 2006. The 1st Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, deployed to Afghanistan as part of Operation Athena, replacing the 1st Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry for a 6-month tour of duty in theatre. In February 2007, the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, replaced the 1st Battalion in Afghanistan for a tour of duty. In September 2008, 3rd Battalion replaced 2nd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry as part of Operation Athena, Roto 6, forming the core of the Task Force Kandahar Battle Group. It served until relieved in place by 2nd Battalion, Royal 22E Regiment in April 2009. The pre-deployment training of a platoon from the battalion was filmed for the reality television series Combat School. In February 2012, the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, formed the Corps of Rotation 1 of the Canadian Contribution Training Mission, Afghanistan, and deployed to Kabul, Afghanistan, on Operation Attention till November 2012. Recognition. The freedom of the city was exercised by the Royal Canadian Regiment in Fredericton, New Brunswick on 2 June 1973 and in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador on June 19, 2005. On 10 November 1983, Canada Post issued the Royal Canadian Regiment, the British Columbia Regiment, as part of the Canadian Forces Regiments 1883 to 1983 series. The stamps were designed by Ralph Tibbles based on a painting by William Southern. The 32 stamps are perforated 13.5 times 13 and were printed by Canadian Bank Note Company, Limited.